Thanks everyone for once again checking out my channel, Imperii Auto. For those that don't know, this is a passion project I've wanted to start for a long time. I'm going to be doing editorial reviews, automotive news, some drive and history reviews like today's video. I'd love to do accessories, some classic cars, and more. As a new channel, I would greatly appreciate a like and subscribe, as it will surely help us grow. And please throw us a comment below. I'm always down to talk cars, and I'll try my best to respond to everyone. So thanks again so much for your support, and I really appreciate you checking out the channel. So today we're going to be talking about a 2004 R230 chassis SL500 that belongs to one of my best friends. I want to dive into the history of the SL Mercedes a bit, and then we'll talk about why this might be the best SL that nobody wants. Alright, so let's start at Genesis. The car that I think most people, even people that know nothing about Mercedes Benz, or really are even into cars, would instantly know if they saw it, is the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing. Originally, the Gullwing design was basically brought about out of necessity because of chassis tubing for racing. The Gullwing design and road version of the 300 SL debuted in 1954, and it kind of took the world by storm. Think of other cars in 1954. I mean, aside from Jaguar and some Italian stuff at the time, really nothing looked or performed like this. And as many have said, this is really the original supercar. In 1957, a roadster version was introduced with a slight bump in horsepower out of the famous 3-liter inline 6. While I've only heard this car on film and not in person, it has to be one of the most amazing sounding engines of all time. This was a total rebirth for the company that technically invented the automobile. Alongside the 300 SL, starting in about 1955, Mercedes also introduced the 190 SL, a bit more affordable coupe option. While it did have a very pretty anemic 1.9-liter 4-cylinder, it was definitely a beautiful design for the time. Starting in 1963, Mercedes followed up with the now famous Pagoda W113 SL. That was the first shift for Mercedes away from basically a road-going race car with the 300 SL to a more sophisticated touring coupe, soon to follow with more and more luxurious SL models. In 1971, Mercedes introduced the R107 SL. Now, this is definitely the first generation of SL I remember seeing on the road as a child, and still to this day, actually. A very, very long run for this chassis. It basically ran from 1971 to 1989. It could be a generational thing for me, but when I think of Mercedes SL, especially the later 560 SL, is the first car that comes to my mind. This period from the 70s to late 80s really cemented Mercedes' reputation of overbuilt tank status symbols. If you were anyone who was anyone in the 80s, you had a Mercedes SL. Following the massive success of the R107 SL, Mercedes once again upped the luxury and the prestige game with the R129 SL. It was a fresh redesign of the now very old 107. This is probably the other car I think of when I think of Mercedes SL. A wide range of engine options were available, including a V12 and 92. On screen, you'll see some pics of one of my other good friends' beautiful black 129 500 SL. But towards the end of the run of the 129, this is where things started to get, interesting, I guess? Over-engineered? All at the same time entering into an infamous merger with Chrysler. Alright, enough history, I promise. This leads us to the car featured today, a 2004 R230 SL500. Starting in 2002, Mercedes released the R230 chassis SL. Now, this was a bold change over the more subtle 129. But with this change came the switch over from a more analog car to lots of development and new tech. Jeremy Clarkson once said, if you want to see what's going to be standard on most cars in 20 years, look at the current Mercedes S-Class. And that approach really didn't fall short on the R230 either. But there is a caveat to all this technology and advancement. This was also a few years after the merger with Chrysler, in which Mercedes had started to cut corners in quality control, while still trying to maintain their insanely Germanic over-engineering, and that was not a good mix. Or was it? This car's owner says he really hasn't had to put much money into the car aside from some common maintenance items, and mostly has been able to do most of the work himself. I'm going to caveat that by saying the owner, who again is one of my best friends, also owned an early 2000s Land Rover, so his pain threshold is a bit higher than most of us. First impressions for me is this car still has a presence. It still looks modern. Now keep in mind this car was almost $90,000 in 2004, and even being 17 years old at the time of this video, it still looks like an expensive car. But they are really not in terms of an SL Mercedes, and why is that? There's a saying I remember from when I owned a W126 S-Class several years ago, and that is, if you want to buy the most expensive car in the world, buy a cheap Mercedes. Perhaps the fears of the Chrysler-era Mercedes SL have scared a lot of people from buying this car, but after spending a bit of time with it, I'm not totally sure that it's as scary as you might think. Alright, driving impressions. Although this engine was a carryover from the late Model 129, it still feels pretty strong by modern standards. It's an incredibly smooth engine, exactly what you'd expect from a high-end Mercedes, with just enough grunt if you want to hear the V8 sing a bit, but subtle and quiet for those trips to the country club. Steering is responsive, although I'm not sure if it was like some sort of electronic assist, but it can be very awkward at low speeds and really heavy. From what I understand, that's a pretty common thing with these cars. The interior is typical Mercedes for the time. Beautiful light wood to match a sea of tan, and I mean a sea of tan. Usually suited for tall Germans, I did find myself a bit more cramped than I would have expected compared to an older SL. I'm 6'3", by the way. But the seats were comfortable with good support. Now let's talk about where some of the obvious cost-cutting rears its ugly head in this car. Everything you touch creaks, and I mean everything. The quality of the material seems nice enough, but for $90,000 when new, you'd think Mercedes would have invested in a little better retention clips for the interior panels. If you can look past the ship-of-the-line groans and creaks of the interior, overall it was a really nice driving experience. The biggest pain point for this car seems to be the Vario roof cylinders. For most of the information I've seen, it's really not a matter of if, but when they will start to go. There's a company that rebuilds them with a core exchange, etc. I don't think it's something that really goes often. It's kind of a one and done type thing, but it's an expensive repair and it's something to think about. There are subtle little Art Deco touches all over this car that harken back to the original 300 SL. And I remember when this car was new, I remember seeing it at the Mercedes dealership, and I never really put the two together. But the more I've studied this car for this video, and really taken a step back and looked at it for what it is, I think it's one of the most beautiful SLs ever made. In summary, the R230 is a absolutely beautiful SL. It seems to not receive as much love as it should. Saying it's the SL nobody wants might be a bit harsh. With a bit of TLC and patience, if you're confident enough to turn some wrenches on your own, and have a backup of a good independent mechanic, I don't think I'd be scared of owning one of these cars at all. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of SL owners that have their own opinions and experiences, and I'd love to hear about them. Is this really the SL nobody wants, or is this the biggest bargain on the market right now? I really appreciate you checking out the video. Again, please like and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.